the wrong turn that started World War I. Sometimes the difference between peace and a global war comes down to a single street corner. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was riding through Sarajevo in an open car alongside his wife Sophie. Earlier that same morning, a group of Bosnian Serb nationalists had already tried to kill him once. One of them threw a bomb at his vehicle. It missed the Archduke. It bounced off the car and exploded behind it instead, wounding several bystanders and officers riding in the following vehicle. The Archduke survived that first attempt completely unharmed. He insisted on continuing the day's schedule anyway. Against the advice of his own security detail, he decided to visit the wounded in hospital later that afternoon. That single decision required a last-minute change to the planned route. Somewhere in the confusion, his driver, a man named Leopold Loika, was never properly informed of the update. As the motorcade reached a street corner near the Latin Bridge, Lojka turned onto the original road by mistake. It was the exact road everyone had agreed to avoid. An official riding in the car immediately shouted at him, telling him he'd gone the wrong way entirely. Loka panicked. He stopped the car right there to reverse. By sheer coincidence, that exact spot happened to be where one of the failed assassins from earlier that morning was standing. His name was Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old who had given up and assumed the whole plot had already failed. He was standing outside a small shop, barely a few feet away. Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots at close range. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were both dead within the hour. News of the assassination spread across Europe within days, shocking royal courts already on edge. Austria-Hungary issued a harsh ultimatum to Serbia, one designed to be almost impossible to fully accept. Within weeks, a tangled web of military alliances across Europe pulled one country after another into war. Historians widely agree the continent was already unstable enough that some kind of conflict was likely eventually, given years of rising tension between rival empires. But the specific timing, the specific spark, came down to something far smaller. It came down to a driver taking a wrong turn and stalling at the one street corner in the entire city where his target happened to be standing. The mold that rewrote modern medicine. Not every scientific breakthrough starts in a lab with a clear hypothesis. Some start with a mess nobody bothered to clean up. In September 1928, a Scottish bacteriologist named Alexander Fleming returned from a 2-week vacation to his cluttered laboratory in London. Before leaving, he'd left out several petri dishes containing Staphylococcus bacteria on his workbench. He hadn't bothered to clean up properly, something colleagues often teased him about. One of those dishes had been accidentally contaminated by a stray mold spore. It likely drifted in through an open window or possibly floated up from a mycology lab 1 floor below. When Fleming examined the dish, he noticed something strange. Around the patch of blue-green mold, the surrounding bacterial colonies had died off completely. They left a clear, empty ring where nothing could grow at all. Most scientists at the time would have simply tossed out a ruined, contaminated sample without a second thought. Fleming, driven by curiosity rather than any grand plan, decided to investigate further instead. He identified the mold as Penicillium notatum. He correctly guessed it was releasing some kind of substance capable of killing bacteria on contact. He published his findings in 1929, calling the substance penicillin. For over a decade afterward, almost nobody paid serious attention to the discovery. Even Fleming himself struggled to purify the substance in usable quantities, and he eventually moved on to other research. 2 other scientists, Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, were the ones who later figured out how to produce it in bulk. It wasn't until World War II when researchers at Oxford revisited his old notes under the desperate pressure of treating infected wounded soldiers that penicillin was finally purified and mass-produced at scale. It went on to save an estimated hundreds of millions of lives in the decades that followed from infections that had once routinely killed. Fleming himself later admitted quite plainly that he had never set out to discover anything at all. He simply hadn't washed a dish before going on holiday. Modern medicine changed forever because of it. The slip of the tongue that ended the Berlin Wall. For nearly 3 decades, the Berlin Wall stood as one of the most heavily guarded borders on the planet. It didn't fall because of an invading army or a signed treaty. It fell because of a mistake made live on television. By November 1989, East Germany's communist government was buckling under enormous pressure. Mass street protests had spread across the country, and a growing wave of citizens kept fleeing to the west through neighboring Hungary and Czechoslovakia. On the evening of November 9th, a government spokesman named Günter Schabowski held a press conference to announce new, slightly relaxed travel rules for East German citizens wanting to visit the West. There was just one problem. Schabowski hadn't been properly briefed on the finer details of the new policy. He'd arrived late to the internal meeting where it was actually discussed and finalized, and he was working almost entirely from a hastily scribbled note. A reporter in the room asked him a simple, direct question. When would these new rules actually take effect? Schabowski hesitated on camera. He shuffled awkwardly through his papers and then said, as far as he understood it, immediately, without delay. That answer wasn't actually true. The real agreed-upon plan involved a controlled, gradual rollout starting the following day with proper coordination and paperwork required at each individual border checkpoint. But his mistaken answer was broadcast live on television across both East and West Germany within minutes of leaving his mouth. Thousands of East Berliners heard the announcement at home. They immediately grabbed their coats and headed straight toward the wall's checkpoints, demanding to be let through right then and there. The confused, overwhelmed border guards received no updated orders from above. Facing a swelling, insistent crowd in front of them, they eventually just opened the gates rather than risk a violent confrontation breaking out. The Berlin Wall effectively fell that same night. It wasn't through any formal government decree or treaty. It happened because of one stumbled answer at a hastily arranged press conference. Within a year, Germany was formally reunified, and the wider communist bloc across Eastern Europe began collapsing in quick succession. Before we get to the most interesting part, help the channel grow, hit subscribe and drop a like. A lot more interesting topics are coming, and we're just getting warmed up. And now, let's continue. The map that was wrong on purpose. Here's a question most people never ask about Christopher Columbus. What if his math had simply been correct? In August 1492, Columbus set sail from Spain with 3 ships. His plan was to reach Asia by heading directly west across the Atlantic, instead of taking the long-established trade route around Africa. His entire plan rested on a calculation that turned out to be significantly, almost dangerously wrong. Columbus believed the Earth's circumference was considerably smaller than it actually is. He also badly underestimated the total distance between Europe and Asia by thousands of miles. By the most accurate measurements available anywhere at the time, his voyage should have run out of food and fresh drinking water long before reaching any land whatsoever. If the Americas simply hadn't existed, sitting geographically in his path by pure chance, his entire crew likely would have starved at sea. Columbus himself would probably be remembered today, if remembered at all, as a footnote about one more doomed Atlantic expedition. Instead, land finally appeared on October 12, 1492. That was weeks earlier than even his own flawed calculations had predicted. Columbus remained convinced for the rest of his life that he'd reached islands just off the coast of Asia. He never once realized, even after several more voyages, that he had stumbled onto 2 entire continents previously unknown to Europeans. The voyages that followed reshaped global trade routes and triggered centuries of colonization and conquest. They permanently altered the population, culture, and ecology of 2 entire hemispheres. All of it kicked off by a navigational miscalculation, one that happened to be rescued, at the last possible moment, by land nobody on the ship even knew existed. Modern historians sometimes call it one of the luckiest wrong guesses in the history of exploration. The man who quietly said no to nuclear war. Most people have never heard his name, yet plenty of historians believe he may have personally prevented World War III. In October 1962, at the tense height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine called B-59 was operating in international waters near Cuba. American naval ships had begun dropping small practice depth charges nearby, trying to force it up to the surface. The submarine's crew had been completely cut off from radio contact with Moscow for several days straight. They genuinely had no idea whether a full-scale war between the United States and the Soviet Union had already started somewhere far above them. On board the submarine was a nuclear torpedo. Standard Soviet protocol allowed the captain to launch it if the ship's 3 most senior officers unanimously agreed the situation justified it. The submarine's captain, convinced that war had likely already broken out given the barrage of explosions around them, wanted to fire immediately. So did the ship's political officer, sitting right beside him. Under the standard chain of command, that agreement between the 2 of them should have been enough to launch. But this particular submarine happened to be carrying an additional senior officer. His name was Vasily Arkhipov, a flotilla commander whose personal approval was also required. Due to his higher overall rank aboard this specific vessel, Arkhipov flatly refused to authorize the launch. He argued forcefully for surfacing instead, and waiting for direct confirmed orders from Moscow before doing anything irreversible. After a tense, sweat-soaked standoff inside the cramped submarine, the other 2 officers reluctantly backed down. The submarine surfaced without ever firing a single torpedo. Historians and former US defense officials have since said openly, on the record, that a single torpedo launch at that exact moment could very plausibly have triggered a full nuclear exchange between 2 superpowers. One man's quiet disagreement inside a windowless steel room deep underwater may be the entire reason that didn't happen. Arkhipov received little public recognition during his lifetime, and details of the incident only became widely known decades later, after Soviet archives were partially opened. The fire that rebuilt a city. A forgotten oven left burning overnight ended up reshaping an entire capital city. In the early hours of September 2nd, 1666, a small fire broke out in a bakery on Pudding Lane in London. It reportedly started because the baker, Thomas Ferdinand, forgot to properly extinguish his oven before heading up to bed for the night. London at the time was built almost entirely from wood and tar-coated thatch, with narrow, cramped streets packed tightly together. A strong easterly wind that night carried burning embers from rooftop to rooftop far faster than anyone on the ground could hope to contain. Over the following 4 days, the fire consumed roughly 13,000 houses and dozens of parish churches, including the original Gothic St. Paul's Cathedral. It left most of the city inside its old medieval walls reduced to smoking ash. Remarkably, official records from the period list only a small handful of confirmed deaths. Many historians suspect the real number was likely far higher, since deaths among the city's poorest residents often went completely unrecorded in that era. In the aftermath, city planners banned wooden construction entirely across London. All future buildings were required to use brick and stone instead. Streets were deliberately widened, and formal building codes were introduced for the very first time in the city's long history. Some historians also believe the fire may have indirectly helped stop the spread of the bubonic plague that had devastated London just the previous year, by destroying the rats and contaminated buildings that helped spread it. A single unattended bakery oven ended up reshaping the physical structure of one of the largest cities on Earth for centuries to come. Thomas Ferdinand, the baker whose oven started it all, was never formally punished, and he continued running bakeries in London for years afterward. Which one of these caught you the most off guard? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this one, and stay tuned because history has plenty more accidents left to reveal. No goodbyes. See you in the next video.